Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share my full review, the digitally digested segment, for the Sony CyberShot RX0 Mark II. Now at roughly $700 US, this is a very expensive piece of technology, but also a very impressive one. It is, however, far from perfect. So let's get right into it. You can see the accessories that Sony included for this demo unit. These are specifically designed for the vlogging bundle that Sony sells. And I understand why they sell a vlogging bundle. It's because this thing is tiny. It's the size of an action camera, has a 1-inch sensor capable of 15 megapixel stills, 4K at 30p internal video recording, which I really haven't had any overheating issues with. And then you've got a screen on the back. You can see the controls, but more importantly, that fully articulates so that you can actually see yourself. So it seems like it's designed perfectly for vlogging, but the reality is that, in my opinion, this camera is not at all for vlogging. So let's talk about what it actually is for. First and foremost, there is nothing like this on the market. There is no camera in this form factor that can shoot video of its quality or stills of its quality. Nothing. So if you're going to compare this to GoPro or a DJI product like the Osmo Action, forget it. Even though this doesn't have the wide angle or the stabilization that any action camera has, it has that 1-inch sensor and the Sony optics that simply destroy everything else that we're talking about. Of course, this is much more expensive, and the only thing it really shares in common with those cameras is form factor and durability, because supposedly this is crush-proof. I don't know the exact IP rating, but over 30, I think 33 feet, 34 feet of depth you can take this to. I don't know the rating in terms of the amount of time you can spend with it underwater. Battery life is fairly solid. No overheating issues for me, for the most part with video. And I did push it. You do have to up the actual threshold like you do with the RX100 Mark VII, but that's not a big deal. And it does get hot, I will tell you that right now. But part of the reason that, of course, there is a vlogger bundle is stuff like this right here. So we have our micro SD card slot, we have the multi-port, we have HDMI out, and we have a microphone jack. So the whole idea here is that why would you include a microphone jack on such a small camera like this, but not on previous generations of the RX100? I mean, now we finally got an RX100, the Mark VII, that does have a microphone jack. But here, before the Mark VII ever launched, this little rugged beast had one. So I think that, was indicative that it was coming on the RX100. But again, no wide angle like a traditional action cam, no stabilization like an action cam. The stabilization here is steady shot, and it's better than nothing, but it really, in order to thrive with this, it either has to be stationary on a tripod or you need to have this on a gimbal. And it will produce stunning video. That's the good news with this. The video out of this is, in my opinion, just as good as what you would get out of an RX100 that is 4K capable, and considering the size difference, which I'm going to bring over an RX100, that's fairly amazing. So Sony has achieved something that, in my opinion, is pretty impressive. Is it worth $700 US? Well, this is where things kind of fall apart. I personally could see paying $700 for this if it had a few things that right now it's missing. Kind of like the first generation didn't have 4K internal video recording, so I wouldn't even look at it. If they were to make this slightly larger, because that's the reason, by the way, those of you wondering why it does not have continuous autofocus, which is really the only reason that I'm probably not going to end up purchasing one of these, if they were able to make this a little bit larger, because again, that's the reason Sony has stated that they cannot integrate continuous autofocus, is that they will not be able to maintain the form factor. I am perfectly fine with it getting a little bit larger in order to accommodate the ability to have continuous autofocus, because I can tell you right now, if this did have continuous autofocus, I would buy it in a heartbeat. And I say that because even though the still capability isn't up to what my RX100 can shoot, the video is there. And even though the lens is fixed, the form factor on this and the ruggedness, knowing that I don't really have to worry about throwing this in a pocket and whether there's a case or not. I mean, you don't want to scratch this or the screen. Again, this is a review unit that already came relatively mucked up, but the whole point is that there's a beauty to having a piece of kit like this. Again, unlike anything else on the market. Now, would I use it with either of these? No, I wouldn't. That's not to say some of you, shouldn't. But for me, as I stated already, knowing that I need a gimbal, even though this is a great controller to have if you have RX100 cameras, especially the Mark 7, and I reviewed this back before it launched. Sony provided me with one for review. I still think that this needs a gimbal. And then with the gimbal, if you do want dedicated audio, you're going to need dedicated audio. It's good that it has the input, but it begins to defeat the purpose of the stealth form factor, low profile, whatever you want to call this miniaturized photographic and video beast. So to me, the key here is using something like this for B-roll. That's not to say that you can't buy it for personal use and use it for video and stuff, as opposed to an RX100. I know there are people out there buying this for that exact reason. But as a general consumer-friendly product, I don't see this being a great fit. I mean, even the actual buttons here, look, if you're a Sony user, power it on, you'll get used to it fairly quickly, but it's not the most fun to navigate through. It has the same general menu system that you're accustomed to with Sony cameras. So that's a good thing. And you can just cycle through them as you would with any Sony camera. So that already is what you're accustomed to if you're a Sony user. But for example, if you want to get into a different shooting mode, that's where I wish they had some sort of dedicated control in order to drive the UI here. So even though I'm familiar with everything, knowing what you had to press in order to gain access, and also not having a quick way to change settings, maybe again a lofty expectation for a camera of this size, which is an absurd size. And also when it comes to battery life, I mean, the BJ1, which is basically a smaller version of the NPBX1 that goes in the RX100, is definitely a good battery, solid performance. But again, that's something that if they had to make this a little bit larger to accommodate the BPX1, I would not be adverse to it. So that kind of is my wish list. Let's get continuous autofocus. Let's get active steady shot, since it now is something that is available in the RX100 Mark 7, which isn't perfect, but it will get this a lot closer to being handheld usable without having to bring a gimbal along. So I think that is really a key in making the RX0 Mark II a winner. This vlogging bundle, again, I don't really know who's buying into it, because at the end of the day, the concept is perfect for vlogging, but the execution is not. It's got the right sensor, it's got the right lens, not quite wide enough an angle, but I'm even willing to live with that. That to me is not a big deal. I do not need a super wide angle on the RX0. You can reserve that for GoPros and Osmo Actions, where you get a sensor that arguably is inferior or a wash with whatever smartphone you're using. If I'm going to invest fresh money in something like this, I want better quality. I want something that differentiates itself from action cameras. And this does exactly that. In a perfect world, though, Sony would make something like this and pair it with the Osmo Pocket, all in a single solution. That would be my perfect RX0 Mark III. Now, I don't expect Sony to do that. I expect them to make an RX0 Mark III with the things I've mentioned. Continuous autofocus, and I think this will actually happen. I don't have inside information. It's just logical. I think we'll have active steady shot so that you'll have fairly stable footage. It still won't be gimbal-like, and it certainly won't be GoPro or Osmo Action-like, but it'll be close and with far superior video. And then on the still side, you'll have still images that, of course, will be far better than any action camera. And that is when all of a sudden at 700 US, even if they made it 800, which Sony, I'm not trying to give you ideas to make this more expensive, I think they have a superstar. I think they have a camera that will appeal to just about everyone. Because look at how small this thing is. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard people complain the RX100 isn't really pocketable. And I know why they say it. It's, you better have some big pockets. But it's still a pocketable point-and-shoot camera. This, on the other hand, I don't care what size your pockets are, it's fitting. This is going to fit because this thing is tiny. And to have such great image and video quality in here, that's why, as I said earlier, I really believe the RX0 Mark III, if it does come to fruition, will have that continuous autofocus and will have that active steady shot. And that alone will be enough to sell me. It doesn't need to have the bigger battery. It doesn't need to have an improved menu system or a bigger screen. If they did those things, I'd be very happy with it. But just on that account alone, I think just those two improvements, and there's no question this is a must-buy for just about everyone who doesn't think that their smartphone is the only way to take pictures. And even those people will look at this because it will take better pictures and it won't give them a gear bag or a camera bag. It'll just be another little gadget to take along. And most of those people already have GoPros or Osmo Action, so I think that's a perfect fit for this. Now, all of that aside, clearly this was designed for other uses. I mean, there's a reason, one person mentioned in my, not unboxing, but first look, that the RX0 Mark II is for a whole nother niche. And I knew that before requesting the review unit. And that space exists. I mean, I'm pretty sure the controlling unit for this is around $700, and that allows you to synchronize with an absurd amount of these and control them simultaneously. Now, you might be wondering what good that is. Well, considering that you don't have continuous autofocus, which means you're going to have to set up that static focus point, and it'll lock and it'll hold that. This allows photographers, videographers, I should really say, to set this up in a dynamic number of locations and get all sorts of angles in 4K at 30p with beautiful quality from a camera that most people won't even notice is there. So whether you're doing, an event, it could be a wedding, it could be filmmaking. I mean, there are so many different ways to utilize a product like this when you can synchronize it with so many additional units, and it has such great fidelity on the video side. The still side I wouldn't recommend it for. It still will outclass your smartphone or any action camera, but the video is what this is really all about. And that's where, obviously, being able to synchronize it and have, an army of these capturing from every angle gives a videographer a distinct advantage, an inherent remote advantage they just could not accomplish with any other piece of gear other than something like this. And that's one of the big reasons that you'll see this in many instances mounted on top of cameras, shooting basically a secondary continuous video feed of what someone might be shooting stills of, or just being used as B-roll, ancillary, because that's what it's perfect for. The built-in microphones are adequate. There's a reason it has a mic jack. They're not great. But that other reason is what I've just mentioned. I mean, being able to possibly pipe in better audio because you want to pick up quality audio from wherever you're remotely setting these up all over the area that you're shooting. So, as a B-roll or even tertiary C-roll video camera, I think this is fantastic. But its Achilles is that lack of continuous autofocus. Once we have that, I won't be calling this only a B-roll magnet or a C-roll or a D or wherever you want to put it in the line. This could be your daily driver, depending on your needs. Even as a professional, if, again, in the same scenario where you want to set these up, sync them, if you had continuous autofocus, you basically have little camera, videographers all over whatever you're shooting. Whatever the scene, the venue may be, you have every angle covered and in a footprint that is as minimal as physically known for 4K internal recording, and the quality is not substituted. So I'm really impressed by the RX0 Mark II. I just can't wait to see what Sony does next when they give us an RX0 Mark III that really can do it all. And this was a clear step in the right direction. So while I won't be purchasing one personally, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't, because you might actually love it. And you may not care at all about the continuous autofocus. I mean, I think you'll care, but it may not stop you from buying it, because if you are vlogging with something like this and the shot is going to stay on you, it's going to hold focus. It's going to lock. That's when not having, this stabilization becomes an issue, and you have to pick up one of those inexpensive gimbals or more expensive gimbals. I mean, with its payload weight, you don't have to get something crazy. The Hohem that I unboxed a while back is pretty much perfect for this, and that's exactly what I used on it when I tested it. And it needs a gimbal. But once we have active steady shot, I think we're in another world. And of course, as I've mentioned over and over again, the continuous autofocus is the other thing. And if you've watched other reviews of this, continuous autofocus is what is always mentioned, and there's a reason. It's because this thing's amazing, and if it had continuous autofocus, everyone would buy it. Without continuous autofocus, it becomes a niche product. And that's even putting aside the lack of stabilization and the lens not being some 120 degree, almost fisheye crap, because that it doesn't need to be. It doesn't. But the improvement from first gen to second was huge. I mean, all of a sudden we've got 4K internal, all of a sudden we've got a rotating display so that you can actually see yourself. I mean, that's what makes you think vlog, but nothing else about this speaks to being able to vlog, even the fact that it has a microphone jack. So again, I like this a lot. I nearly love it. I've mentioned where I would like to see it improved. And it wouldn't hurt if all of a sudden we also had phase detection on here too, but you don't really need it. Just give me continuous autofocus and I'm perfectly happy with contrast. I have no problem with that at all. And if they can improve image quality on the still side, welcome. I mean, it is a welcomed attribute. But overall, I think that it's justified that this is a $700 piece of hardware. It's just far from being right for everyone. And considering it wears the CyberShot brand, and it is an RX, the fact that I feel it's better utilized in a professional realm with the synchronization that I was talking about in the controlling unit makes me feel like they didn't know what the quite right place to put it was, and that's how it wound up in the RX lineup, because frankly there is no other space to position something like this. And I think Sony's trying to find their way with this. They know where they're going, and I think the Mark III is when we're all going to want an RX0. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them, hit that like button, and as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.